From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Chung, and this matters. Across Ontario, the COVID vaccine passport system is officially in effect. This week, Ontario joins other provinces like Quebec, Manitoba, BC, and New Brunswick in using proof of vaccines in many public spaces. Maybe you've already downloaded yours. You'll have to show it if you want to eat at a restaurant indoors, work out at a gym, or go to a sporting event this fall. On this podcast, we've talked a lot about vaccine passports over the last couple of months, the politics at Queen's Park, the legal issues, and the debates. We all want to know what the other side of living through the pandemic looks like. But now, the vaccine passports are here. They're not theoretical anymore. We have actual experience in real-life situations. So here's your guide for everything you need to know right now. Joining This Matters, Rosa Saba, business reporter for the Toronto Star. We'll talk about the rollout of vaccine certificates in Ontario, how it's working, and what has business owners already worried going forward. Rosa, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
The vaccine passport in Ontario is here, and there are some listeners who may have already used them if they went to a gym or maybe they ate indoors at a restaurant. But maybe that's a good starting point of the top line info to get people up to speed. What should people know about the vaccine passport right now?
Right. So it's not so much a passport as a certificate. You download it from a portal. It's a watermarked certificate that shows when you had your second dose of the vaccine, and you have to be at least 14 days out of that second dose. So if I got my dose yesterday, I have to wait 2 weeks before I can go. And you need the vaccine certificate to be verified by a business owner or their employee to get into a number of non-essential businesses, but not all of them. So for example, restaurants and bars, you're required to have it if you are doing indoor dining, but not if you're dining on the patio, not if you're doing takeout or delivery, or even stopping in to use the washroom, right? So the McDonald's drive-through, you don't need a vaccine certificate, but sitting down inside, you do. You need it for gyms, fitness studios, spin cycle, that kind of thing, but not for salons. And you need it to go to the movies, but not to go shopping for clothes or for shoes. So it's definitely not all non-essential business activities, but a good number of them. And I think that especially as it starts to get colder, people are going to be using them more and more because they're going to go do indoor dining instead of patio.
And there was a bit of confusion over the first couple days of what the vaccine certificate looks like. Can you set the record straight? Is it a PDF that people can download or a QR code that can be scanned eventually?
Right now, it's just a PDF. It's very, very similar to the receipt that you probably got or were sent after you got your second dose. But I believe that this one has a watermark, whereas the other one did not. But there's no QR code yet. The QR code is coming October 22nd, which is when the Ontario government is going to launch its verification app for businesses. At that point, it'll still be a PDF. You'll download a new vaccine certificate from the same portal, but with a QR code this time. So for you and me, either you have the PDF on your phone or you download it and you print it out. Either one is fine.
Right. So bringing us to that app then, again, October 22nd, when that's being rolled out, what do we know about how that app will work? Because there's sort of two sides of it, and there's a bit of concern about why there isn't one side that's being represented. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so some other jurisdictions, I'm going to use Quebec as an example because it was one of the first to jump on this, have an app for consumers, for customers like you and I, and also for businesses. So you can use the consumer side app to display your QR code, to download and display it, and then the app for the businesses is used to scan and verify it. Ontario is not going that route. So as I mentioned, the only thing that's going to change for you and me is that October 22nd, we can download a vaccine certificate with a QR code. The app that is being launched is only for businesses. And so that's what the business owners and the employees will use to scan your QR code. It should be noted, though, that after October 22nd, people can still use the old certificates, the ones we're using right now. You're not mandated to download the new version with the QR code. So someone could still walk into a business with the certificate they got in September and be allowed in as long as it was valid.
Do we know why there is a business side to that app, but not the customer side? Like you were saying, other provinces have done similar systems, and there's a bit more, almost sort of equality across the board between the two sides. Do we know why Ontario isn't going that route?
I don't have a why, unfortunately. No, they've definitely been criticized for not just essentially taking the app from another province and using that and instead making one in-house. Critics have said the technology is already there, it's been tested, it's been tweaked, and also it would take a lot less time as opposed to making your own app. There are also concerns how long or not long Ontario is taking to build its app. So my colleague Omar Masla reported recently that Ontario is basically going to launch this app in maybe a month and a half as of his time of reporting, whereas Quebec's app took 4 months to make. So there are definitely concerns over the timeline and also just questions as to why they're making their own app when other options exist. But unfortunately, I don't have a clear why as to the reason they went in this specific direction.
You'll know that a lot of small businesses and business groups have been in support of vaccine passports or certificates. That is seen as one way to prevent another lockdown in Ontario. But that doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't some worries about how this works in reality, right? And you spoke to some businesses about how these certificates will work in practice. What did they tell you?
So prior to the launch of the vaccine certificate system, one of the biggest concerns for businesses is just dealing with backlash. On Monday, there were, some restaurant owners saying that already they were getting complaints from customers who were maybe calling to make a reservation on Thursday. They're already getting backlash. They're getting people canceling things, getting people getting angry at them. And they're pretty frustrated because it's not their rule. And often they have, maybe a young host or hostess at the restaurant is just doing their job and people are going to get mad at them. I mean, we've all seen the stories about how bad that can get. So that was one of the biggest concerns, but there are actually some very slightly more technical wrinkles, not all of which have been ironed out yet. So one of the biggest concerns for businesses is financial liability. If an individual or a business breaks the rules of the vaccine certificate system, they can be fined, they can be charged. It's a very serious offense. And businesses are worried about their ability to tell a fake from a real when it comes to a vaccine certificate, but also when it comes to exemption notes. Because remember right now, if someone has a medical exemption, all they need is a doctor's note or a note from a registered nurse to prove that they have a medical exemption. And that's it. And that's not like a health card. It's not something that a business owner can easily tell if it's fake or real. They don't have the time to call up the doctor on every single exemption note, right? So there's a lot of concerns about that. But you may have seen my story. The vaccine certificate itself is actually fairly easy to fake. So you do need access to a real one, but if you have access to a real one, it's actually very easy to edit and make a fake for someone else in a way that on a PDF or a paper, again, we have no QR codes yet, would be virtually undetectable for a business owner to tell the difference, right? Because it's just the editing of the text. So there's a lot of concerns over that. I think that, what I've heard, for example, from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business is they're telling businesses, it's our understanding that if you let someone in good faith and it turns out that their certificate was a fake and you genuinely had no clue and you did what you were supposed to do, you shouldn't be financially liable. But there is definitely still that worry. And then there's a couple of other just specific little wrinkles that people are trying to figure out. A pretty big one, I would say, is when it comes to membership-based businesses. So gyms, fitness studios, like we talked about, you do need a vaccine certificate for those. And there are a number of gyms, including large chains like Good Life Fitness, that are planning on checking people once, only once. So they check the vaccine certificate. They make a sort of record that the person has been checked. I like to call it a proverbial check mark next to someone's name. They're not keeping the record of that person's vaccination status or anything, but they are making a note on their account to say you don't need to check this person again. Now, it was my understanding that the regulations did not allow this, but I actually have not managed to get a clear answer from the Ontario government yet as to whether those gyms are breaking the rules or not. Good Life seems certain that they're good. They checked with their lawyers and they said they're confident that they're not breaking the rules. There are other gym chains that are doing it, but some of the smaller ones are nervous because they don't know. They don't have lawyers to consult. So we still don't have a clear answer on whether businesses like gyms actually do have to check their customers every single time, even if they see them several times a week. And then the last one that I can think of, this is something my colleague Josh Rubin reported on, is there's confusion around food courts in malls. Because the food kiosks at a food court are obviously all takeout, and takeout restaurants do not require vaccine certificates, but dining in does. So the big question is, who checks the certificate? Should it be the person working at the takeout counter at, Montreal Walk, New York Fries, or do you have security guards patrolling the food court asking people for their documents? So far, the latter seems to be what big malls are going to be doing, but that's definitely another thing that has been causing people a lot of worry.
Right. Or in the case I saw at St. Lawrence Market, they do have like a general eating area. I believe they've gotten rid of the tables entirely because the market has decided, you know what, we don't even want to go down that path. We'll just keep this strictly as a grocery store because once you get into the technical details, it can get really complicated.
And it sounds like some restaurants are doing the same. While the weather is nice, they're just saying, you know what, we're not going to do indoor dining. We're just going to have our patio. We're not going to bother, and we will cross that bridge when we absolutely have to.
We'll be right back. When you talk about the enforcement bit, I can understand restaurants saying, well, now we have to enforce these rules that aren't necessarily our rules. And I don't know that it's a one-for-one comparison, but it sort of makes me think about the face mask mandate that businesses had about wearing masks indoors. I believe it was last July in Toronto proper. That was put in as a bylaw. And again, there were people who were unhappy about it. But in most cases, it seems like businesses and people just sort of carried on, right? Of course, there are always going to be people who don't like that rule. But for the most part, when you walk into a grocery store now, people just are wearing the mask. It can't be that different from the vaccine certificate or passport, I would imagine.
No, I do agree. It's definitely just another thing that the businesses are worried about. And there's always going to be this minority of people who do cause a fuss. And they are the loudest voices, but they're not the majority. My colleague Josh, again, and as well as our reporter Ireland Lavery, they talked to businesses about how this was actually going down. Because, of course, I'd reported on all the things that could go wrong, but they wanted to know if that's what was happening. And aside from a few hiccups, I mentioned the system, the portal for getting the certificate went down and, maybe a few customers turned away. So far, knock on wood, it seems to be going okay. There are definitely these things that need to be ironed out. For example, if it turns out that membership-based businesses can implement a system where they only have to check once, you're going to have a lot of businesses wondering, can I do that too? If I'm a bar that has a regular, can I do that too? So there are definitely questions that are unanswered, and it takes a little more time than checking whether someone has a mask or not. But it is very important to remember that the majority of people are totally fine with this. And, when it comes to issues of fraud, like the concerns about the editability of the certificate, again, the majority of Ontarians don't need to worry about that because they have a valid vaccine certificate. So it's important to point out these issues, but also point out that hopefully most people are not going to encounter these problems.
Right. It is still very early days, but I'm so interested in how we talked about vaccine certificates and passports and how a system would work. And so much of it was theoretical for a long time. And then now we're seeing it in practice. And again, we'll need more time to see how it actually plays out. But that's interesting to me of comparing what we thought it would be and what it actually exists as in this province.
Absolutely. And good point. Every province is doing this differently. Ontario is not the only province that held off on doing this until they couldn't any longer. Alberta, obviously, is going to be doing something similar. And it's super interesting here in Canada to see how BC is doing it, or Manitoba, where you have a card, like a proper card with a QR code, which some people would argue is maybe better than a PDF. And then, of course, we have Quebec, which I believe was the first province to go ahead with a system like that, if I'm not mistaken. And so we have all these different jurisdictions. There are definitely some business groups that are saying, why can't we just have a national system? We are going to have a national vaccine passport for things like flying. Why can't it just be used across the country? And that's been the question for all of the pandemic, if not, hundreds of years. It's kind of just one of those things where we have this separation.
Federalism. Yeah.
I was going to say, we have this separation between the provinces and federal government, and, a national system is just not always going to happen. But it'll be interesting to see all of these things roll out, especially when Ontario finally launches its app. We're going to see how that works. There's, still some things we don't know about it, such as how are exemptions to the vaccine going to be implemented into the QR code, right? That's a really big question. So there's a lot still left to see. And you're right. The only way we'll know what the biggest problems are by waiting and watching.
I'm also interested in how you've covered this throughout the pandemic as a business reporter, because in so many different ways, businesses have been asked to adapt. They've been asked to change. They've been asked to enforce new rules, right? Whether it's capacity limits or wearing face masks, or now we're talking about vaccine passports. What kind of feedback are you hearing from businesses about how this whole process has been like?
Businesses overall have really felt like the pressure and the responsibility of enforcing these kinds of mandates, whether it's a mask mandate or a vaccine certificate mandate, have really been downloaded onto them with not as much support as they would like. There's a lot of confusion over what they're supposed to do if someone gets violent or belligerent, right? I believe that at some point the government told them to call 911, but as one restaurant owner said to me, am I supposed to call 911 every single time? Don't people need those ambulances and those police officers? Like they didn't think that seemed like the best advice. So there's a lot of concern and confusion. There's always a call for more financial support. Some small businesses don't just have a company smartphone or tablet, right? Some of them might live in remote areas and not have access to the same technology as other businesses. So there's always this, you're giving us more responsibility. We are the front line of making sure people follow these rules, and we would like more support. But, a lot of businesses support a vaccine certificate mandate to some extent. I believe the CFIB at last count, around half of their members are in support of it. And they understand that this is an alternative to a lockdown. And, I can tell you, as many complaints as there might be about mandating vaccines for non-essential businesses, the last thing that businesses want is another lockdown. There's a lot of agreement that would be deadly. And so, they're sort of reluctantly going along and hoping that this will successfully avert a lockdown.
Right. This system, even if it is imperfect or that there's confusion around it, it's better than the worst case scenario, which is going back to what things were last November, December, when everything was clamped down in this province.
Exactly. It's better than nothing. We iron out the wrinkles as we go. I mean, so much of what we've done over the past year and a half on a federal, provincial, municipal level has been, let's give it a shot and then figure it out, right? Think of CERB, right? Think of, I believe it was the rent subsidy, which the federal government had to scrap and redo because it wasn't working. But they needed to get these things out quickly. And that means that there are going to be mistakes and there are going to be imperfect programs. So I do think it's important to remember that, all of these different things have been done in a state of emergency, in an unprecedented circumstance. How many times have we heard that term? And so, it's sometimes you just have to do something and then fix it later.
Rosa, thank you so much for your reporting and for being here.
Thank you as well.
And that is Rosa Saba, business reporter for the Toronto Star. You can follow Rosa's and the rest of our business team's reporting online at thestar.com/business. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Adrian Chung. Our This Matters team is me, Adrian Chung, Brian Bradley, JP Fozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bachnick, Raju Mudar, Saba Aitazaz, and Sean Pattenden. Our music is by So Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Pattenden. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us your comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribing matters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.